Hey everyone, this is your OG, Original Gamer, and this is another Godforge video. Today we get to see the buffs, debuffs, and disable mechanisms in Godforge. We will be providing a reaction to Simon's video that came out today, and then finishing with a quick relook at the starter champs with what we know about their kits and debuffs. This will be vital information for anyone looking to push deep into the Alpha Cavern experience in July or the Alpha Cavern Challenge in August, September, and then, of course, eventually in the global launch before the end of the year, though that's subject to change. Without further ado, let's optimize. All right, so
Hey guys, this is Simon from Fateless.
all right, so Simon put out a video today and he goes over a few things. So we're going to provide a quick recap and reaction because he covers a lot. So he starts off talking about how the alpha is going to be later in July, but everything's on track for that. He mentions Godforge's YouTube channel. Go and subscribe. That'll be where you'll get all your official news for the game, patch notes, the music is there. So he's showing that right now. So he mentions that the music is really incredible. If you haven't listened to it, they've done a really great job on it, on the score, and it's just good listening, if nothing else, too. But that's on there, and then everything that will be coming out officially will be on there as well. He mentions that for PC and Mac, they have their own launcher. You see it here, so that's how you launch and play the game. And they're working on Android, and I think iOS is something that they're probably the farthest from, but they're working on all the platforms. He mentions that if you were signed up for the alpha, you should be testing. You should have gotten an email, and that they sent out 45,000 emails and 25,000 people opened them. So there's still 20,000 out there that might be sitting in their spam folders and they don't think they got it. So he just kind of reiterates, as we have, just make sure you check your spam folder, because until it's a trusted sender, it might go to there. And so you don't want to miss out on it over something simple or technical like that. He talks about the work that they're doing, going screen by screen here and just making sure they lock out non-alpha relevant screens. And then he shows the cavern here. Oh, he shows weapons real quick, and then he shows, so he's talking about blocking them out, and then he shows a few different things here. So he shows us Volkadlak here at level stage 4. So he might be the champion you have to beat. He shows the first 4 stages. So that is Brazilian Archer, Achilles, and Shublagal is the first 3, and then Volkadlak is number 4. So that's interesting. He flashed real quick the drop rates. I'm not sure if we can catch that again, but we'll see if we can. Real quickly here, he flashed the drop rates. So you see equipment, Godsteel Olympus rare, so it looks like a faction specific equipment piece, or Godsteel is like a resource you use in the Godforge to maybe pull a rare, either piece of equipment or gear, or a rare champion, but I would imagine it's gear. And this is just sort of like the base materials you need to forge it. So it gives you 3 different levels of Godsteel, rare, epic, and legendary. It gives you a character reward at 15%, which is a pretty decent chance for a character reward, so that's interesting. So not sure if this is the character rewards for stage 4, or each of these is that's the character reward or the boss. We don't know that, but maybe you can pick up Achilles and Shublagal in the first few stages. That will be interesting to see. But we did catch the drop rates. You also notice Simon has some red stones up here in the right corner, which he hadn't ever before. So he's reached a point where he's receiving those as rewards. So that's interesting. He talks about, okay, debuffs, buffs, and disables. He mentions, debuffs are in red, buffs are in blue, disables are sort of like a pink color, and that's how you can tell them. So he starts talking about that. He's talking about stats as well, and just some different pieces. So he goes into Mordred, and he says, look at his basic. He has Corrupt as a debuff on his basic. And so, like, we'll get to see what that means here by the end of the video. He shows us all the debuffs, all the buffs, and all the disables and what they do. So we'll actually know what Corrupt does by the end of the video. He then talks about, and we're adding in Mordred's basic and core skills here. We saw them in the video the other day, but now obviously we have the write-up for him. So he not only, he puts a debuff on his basic, but then he puts a buff and a disable on his core. So very, we're going to look to, obviously, he's going to be a good champion, being able to do all that in just 2 skills. That's not even his ultimate. Okay, so then Simon talks about how to gain your ultimate ability. He gives us some great information here with regards to the stats and like how do you get divinity up to this 1,000 so you can use your ultimate. He says, well, there's this multiplier here. You can gain divinity whenever an enemy is defeated, and he says it doesn't have to be Anubis that defeats the enemy. That was something we weren't sure on. So as long as he's on the team and the enemies are, the wave of 4 or 5 is defeated, that's building towards his ultimate. So that gives us a lot more introduction to how those ultimates are built and what that divinity is like. So he says you start with a 0 initial divinity, but they're playing with maybe starting with higher initial divinity or what the divinity gain rates are going to be. But he shows Anubis's Tomb Watcher here, and it's got a pretty amazing skill. So again, we knew Anubis was great, and he mentions that the bonus, his divinity gain, doubles if the enemy is aligned with order, because he's a chaos. So like if he's fighting against the right alignment, it doubles his divinity gain. So that's interesting to note, and he says we can build teams around Anubis to help him build his divinity. That's going to be some of the first builds we'll probably look to do. All right, and then he gets into the stats here, and he's just talking through HP, attack, defense are all pretty straightforward. Speed is how fast your turn meter gain is. He talks about crit rate and crit damage. They're what we thought they were. Crit rate maxes at 100, but you may not have to crit cap at 100 if some of your effects allow you to reduce that. He talks about resistance and accuracy, and I got all confused, but I cleared this up in the Discord. I thought they had taken accuracy and resistance away from landing debuffs and disables, but no, it still has its impact. Like, you still need to have higher accuracy than the opponent's resistance to be able to land a debuff or a disable, or a turn meter feature. So that's still the case. But in addition to that, accuracy increases the chance to place a strong hit on the enemy. But if you think of it, it makes sense. Like, if you hit accurately, it's going to be more impactful. And if you have high resistance and someone can't hit you accurately, like they can't pin you down, then it reduces the amount of critical damage you receive from a crit hit based on your resistance. So that would explain why we've seen some of the builds that Simon has have a 300 resistance and 300 accuracy, because that's helping him build damage and protect himself. So interesting to see that accuracy and resistance have a secondary effect that we hadn't heard of before. So here in this portion of the video, okay, and he also talks, before we jump to this, he also talks about initiative, and we weren't sure if it was initiative or initial divinity, because it was just INIT, but here's what we know now based on what Simon has told us. Basically, your initiative is the rate at which your divinity fills. Like, per turn, you gain divinity through your initiative. I'm not sure if it's like you have 90 initiative, you gain 90 divinity every turn. I'm not 100% sure how that works. It might be that, in which case, if you have 100 initiative, then every turn you're gaining 100 divinity. Plus, let's say there's 2 waves of 4, and you defeat them, and the divinity boost is based on eliminating enemy. Well, that's 8 enemies, so that's 800 divinity plus your initial divinity of 100 per turn. That's 200. Now you have 1,000 divinity, and you can use your ultimate in that 3rd wave. That seems to make sense. Before, the numbers weren't really making sense and adding up in terms of how you would get your ultimate to use it within a 3-wave fight, or use it towards that hardest content that's typically at the end of that 3-wave fight. He also mentions that weapons will have a passive that will help, so imprinting will be something that will help as well. Now we get into the status effects. Okay, so he goes through the buffs first. There are 20 buffs he talks about, there are 23 debuffs he talks about, and then there are 8 disables. So a number of them are pretty straightforward, what we titled sort of like core stat boosts or core stat reductions if they're debuffs. Those are pretty straightforward: accuracy up, accuracy down, attack up, defense down. Those are there. Some notable ones we will stop. I will say barrier versus shield is going to be an interesting sort of thing to look at. You have both barrier as a buff and shield, but barrier can absorb incoming damage equal to the strength of the barrier before depleting HP. Now, shield says the same thing. It says absorbs incoming damage to the strength of the shield before depleting HP. There's one difference: shields cannot stack or be increased. Barriers can stack and be increased. So that's one notable or two notable buffs we can call out there: barrier versus shield. Then you see defense up, 1, 2, and 3, attack down. Immortal, HP cannot decrease below 1. This is sort of like unkillable, I would say. That's an interesting one. And then initiative up, this increases the initiative stat by 10, 20, or 30%. We're definitely going to be looking for champions that have this buff, because it will help our champions get to their ultimates faster. We've seen, I think Aphrodite may have it, I'm not sure. We've seen these arrows in battles that where Simon has fought. So somebody has put the buff on, and we've seen these arrows come up, but I don't think it said initiative up, or we didn't see it. But that is going to make it easier for you to get your ultimate more quickly. Next, we have another one we saw, which is Intercept. Broomhild has this, and it redirects, kind of like Taunt. It redirects all of the damage to that other champion. You have Mend. This reduces bleed stacks by 1. We'll talk about bleed stacks after, as we talk about the 3 starter champions and how this impacts them. But then, in addition, it heals 10% max HP at the start of the turn. So that's very interesting. Not only does it take off these bleed stacks, but it gives you a heal. That is Mend. And there are only a few. There are not a lot of heals. I think that's about the only one. Here's another that's really interesting, is Phoenix. This is probably the strongest buff I think we saw. You guys can tell me if you think differently, but instantly revive upon death with 100% HP and 100% turn meter. Even Simon says like they may have to take a look at that one. I want to know which champs have Phoenix, because this looks incredible to be able to put out either on even one team member, but also on an AoE would be incredible. So then you have Protect. This is ally who places this buff takes 15, 30, or 45% of the damage. So most of these have 3 tiers or 3 options, which is nice. That's more dynamic, I would say, than a game like Raid Shadow Legends, which there's a weak and a strong. Now, but some of them, as you see with Reflect, only have a single buff level. There's only 1, there isn't 3 levels. So you either have 1 or 3 is kind of the way it goes. But Reflect it is an interesting one as well, as he gets forward to it. This reflects the next non-resisted debuff received, kind of throws the debuffs back at the team that's sending it. So that's interesting. Some res up, gives you base stat boost. Retaliate, we've mentioned this one. King Arthur has this. Looks like going to be a really impactful way to cycle people through their skills faster. Sharpen raises crit damage stat and strong hit damage by 5%, 10%, or 15%, depending on which level. Shield is just, again, we talked about this one at the beginning, reduces damage, or it basically stops damage until the shield is depleted, and then it starts depleting. So it puts HP out in front of your HP in a sense, and but these cannot be stacked or increased. Then Speed Up. This was one we had seen from Lady Zoc. but we weren't exactly sure what speed up 2, which is the one Lady Zoc has, but it puts a 20% speed increase for, I think, 2 turns. So that is speed up. We see that one. We're going to talk again on that when we get to Lady Zoc and the starter champions relook. So Stalwart is a really interesting one. Immune to disables. And so basically what it acts is like a counter. So if you have 2 stalwarts and they come up with 1 disable, then like it takes a stack out of that. So you're putting up basically layers of defense when you have stalwart, and then their debuffs or disables, I'm sorry, remove 1 each time. So that's interesting. You can keep layering them up, and then they take them away as they try to use them, but it keeps you immune to disables. Vanish. You cannot be targeted directly. That's something similar to what Raid has. And then the last one is called Ward. Ward means you're immune to attack damage. This is going to be an interesting one to try out and to test. So those are all the buffs, all 20 buffs, and then he rolls back up to the top and he goes down through the debuffs. So we will show them to you and talk for a second. So yes, accuracy down, acid. Okay, we remember that Ramses has acid. Okay, so disables armor sets and deals 5% max HP damage at the start of the turn, deals double damage to shield and barriers. So he says this is for really getting through hard to get by or stubborn or annoying waves, like really tanky waves. So this is extremely valuable knowledge in terms of looking at the starter champs. We'll dive more into this at the end when we talk about Lady Zoc and Ramses and Guan Yu again. This is another new debuff we'd never seen. Aether Burn. It increases target's chance to weak hit by 5, 10, or 15% and reduces divinity by 3, 6, and 9%. So making it harder for them to get their ultimate, making it harder for them to strong hit or have anything but a weak hit. So it's limiting their damage potential. And then you have attack down, which is very straightforward. It just drops your attack by 20, 40, or 60%. So that's pretty straightforward. But he gets to an interesting one here with Banish. Enemies that die with this debuff, or if it's placed just before death, cannot be revived while this is on. So what he described it as is there's like a banish stack where like you have 1 or 2 or 3 banishes, and like their team may try to revive them, and it takes away from that stack, and they can't revive them until they remove all those that banished stack. He explained it something like that. We will definitely want to try this out and understand how this works, but Banish looks to be, in my opinion, maybe one of the strongest debuffs we've seen. Then you have Blaze. This is a burn feature, 2, 4, 6% damage of enemy max HP on all heroes on the team. So that's interesting. That's our burn mechanism. Then he will get to another key debuff, which is Bleed, and this is the debuff that Lady Zoc has in her kit. So we'll look at it, but we won't go too deep until we go to the end and go through the 3 champs again. Damages an enemy 1% of max HP damage each turn, stacks up to 10 times on subsequent application. Okay, we did not know that. This makes Bleed very interesting, that it can stack 10 times. That basically means 10% of max HP damage, which we'll talk about how that matches up with Ramses and Guan Yu. You definitely want to look at that, but Bleed is a very interesting component, and we'll definitely want to test it, but we've got some insight now, and we're going to share with you at the end what it means for the starter champs. Then you got a block revive. Just means, obviously enemies that die with this debuff cannot be revived. That's pretty straightforward. Our favorite debuff, Blunt, 1, 2, and 3. Yes, please. I'll have all of them. Decreases strong hit damage and critical damage by 10, 20, or 30%. So basically makes their hits feel hollow, like they just don't hit you as hard as they should. That is Blunt. Okay. Next one is really interesting. It's called Charm. Takes the next attack for the enemy that placed this debuff. This one's a little confusing for me. I think I would need to see it happen. I feel like or either that or maybe it needs to read a little differently. So takes the next attack for the enemy that placed this debuff. Duration reduced when triggered. Takes the next attack for the enemy that placed this debuff. Okay, the way he explained it and the way I think Charm works is that you put Charm on the enemy and then you get to take their next attack. Like you get to step in for them in the turn cycle. I think that's how it works. This one may just not read perfectly, or I may be confusing it. Takes the next attack for the enemy that placed this debuff. I think it's that if you place Charm on the enemy, you go in their turn order position. I think. We'll have to learn about that one more. But that's an interesting one. Really cool. Kind of almost like an ultimate. Lets you jump in during their turn meter. That's kind of cool. Corrupt. The unit that placed this debuff steals any buffs received. So I put Corrupt on the enemy. Any buffs that their team put on that enemy, I just automatically get. That's pretty cool. So that's Corrupt. We now know what that one is. And I guess anytime it's triggered, it reduces either the stacks of Corrupt or I don't know. I think it would be stacks. I'm not sure. Defense down. Okay, and then we get to Drain. So defense down is pretty obvious. Drain is interesting because Guan Yu has Drain. So this is the last of the debuffs that we have on the starter champions. Drain, attackers deal 10, 20, and 30% increased damage, and it is lifesteal. They heal for 10, 20, and 30% of damage inflicted. So your OG was wrong. Got this one totally wrong when I said I didn't think it was lifesteal because I didn't think the other two were lifesteal, and they aren't. But we're going to talk about that. So Guan Yu's stock definitely jumps up because he has a natural lifesteal built into his kit. So you're definitely going to want to stick around for the end and see what does this mean for your starter champs. Ramses was kind of our early favorite. Who is it now based on us knowing the debuffs that they place? You'll have to stick around to find out. All right, so finishing up. Now, Hex. Hex is interesting. It looks like a typo. It's just a copy paste from the previous one. So he says that basically what it is that allies of, Hex, it works similar to Raid in that, like, everyone takes either 5, 10, or 15% damage. They all receive damage, like AoE damage for a single point attack. So that works similar to how Raid does, but he says there's typo. This is just a copy and paste of the one above. But so Hex does the same sort of thing as Raid. Then he has initiative down, which obviously this would keep you from getting your ultimates faster. Then there's 3 really interesting ones, sort of lockouts. First is lock core, then lock passive, and lock ultimate. At first, I couldn't get around the reading of it. I was like, I feel like it should have read core ability, passive ability, ultimate ability, but then I thought about it and I was like, wait, it could be an AoE thing where it's on the whole team, and so it would be all their core abilities, and then it made more sense for me. But lock core takes away the core abilities for whatever team members or whatever opponents it's placed on. But these look extremely powerful to be able to lock out passives, lock out ultimates, and lock out cores. Is definitely going to be skills debuffs we're going to be looking for in the kits as we get to know more. Then we have res down. That's pretty straightforward. Speed down. That's just sort of the inverse of speed up. But then we get to 2 cool ones here. The last 2, Terrify. So this increases your divinity cost by 50%. So basically sort of like a fear mechanism, but makes it very difficult, of course, for you to doubles what you need to do to get your ultimate, basically. So that's interesting. Terrify will be one we'll be looking to see who has that in their kit. We've never seen it anywhere else. And then Vulnerable increases damage dealt by debuffs by 20, 40, or 60%. Kind of like to me, it struck me as like a weaken for debuffs. Like it makes debuffs more impactful because sometimes they can feel too small and everybody just goes to sort of raw damage. So I think this is a way to balance that so you can have team members with vulnerable and then debuffing and really blow up the damage dealing. And I think that's pretty cool. So this is all of your debuffs. And now we're going to go through the 8 disables that he shows as well. Once he finishes up, he'll scroll all the way back up. And the disables are confuse. We've seen this in a previous video. Anytime the person has a champion has confuse on them, they will attack a random ally with their basic skill, but they'll do 75% reduced damage. So it's only 25% of their base skill. So it's not like they're going to wipe their team out every time you put confuse on them. It's going to be like chipping away at them. So that's good to see. It's balanced. Despair skips their turn, they get skipped, and then they cannot receive any positive buffs or effects. I thought this was really cool. I haven't seen this exact sort of mechanism before. I definitely doesn't exist in Raid, but I really liked, well, I guess block buffs, but I like how they went with it, how it skips a turn and they can't put any positive effects on them. And then the duration is reduced whenever there is an attempt to put a positive buff or effect. So you still have to kind of like fight through it, which is the philosophy or theme we're seeing with a lot of the debuffs and the stacking, is that you can stack them up, and then every attempt you have to do that, it's intercepted by that debuff or by that disable or by that buff, which is a really neat kind of one-for-one way of getting out ahead and building strong defenses, or really layering debuffs to do high levels of damage over time. Really cool how this is looking to be laying out. Okay, so after Despair, we get to see one we would expect, especially with Asgard being, I think, I don't want to say that I think Asgard was the most popular faction in the most recent poll. So we would absolutely expect after Despair to be seeing Freeze, and we do. And so Freeze skips next turn, and then also any incoming turn meter fill effects are reduced or cut in half. So that's interesting. They've put a little twist on all of the disables so that they're not just a single pivot point. They don't just do one thing. They do one thing and then something else. So that's really going to be interesting as we get into combos and building teams and how this all is going to create synergies. I think they are laying the groundwork for a lot of interesting combinations and community built fun. I don't know how else to describe it, but just fun mechanisms that we'll be able to see play out as we get in here. The next one is Morph. This increases heroes battle attack stat by 20, 40, or 60%. So this is not, and there is also attack up as well. So you can have an attack up and a morph, and that would be almost duplicating, but it would really increase attack. So morph is a sort of positive disable, I guess you'd say, where most of the other ones are sort of a negative. And the next one we see is Petrify. Petrify skips you skip the turn, and then your divinity your gain rate for your divinity is reduced by 50%. Therefore, it's twice as hard to get your ultimate when you have Petrify on. But it also skips your turn, so you're not able to raise any divinity on that turn as well. So it really just locks you out and sets you back on getting your ultimate. That is Petrify. Then we see Sleep. Sleep also has an interesting change to it. It does skip your turn, and then incoming damage from attacks are increased by 30%, which is pretty cool. And then the duration of the sleep is reduced when attacked, like per ability. But that's cool. So under sleep, you're going to take more damage, which is a unique dynamic and will be making us look at sleep a little differently as a disable mechanism. All right, there are 2 left. We have stun and we have taunt. Stun just simply skips the next turn. They're unable to take their turn, and then taunt attacks the unit that placed this disable. So like if you have a taunt on, then you attack whoever placed the taunt on you with your basic ability, and you do 25% reduced damage. So you hit with your basic, but you don't do full damage. And that's if someone lands a taunt disable on you. Okay, so those are all of the disables, buffs, and debuffs. Now we're going to take a quick look back at my video having reaction to Simon's video from the starter champs. So this is a video within a video within a video. It's like Inception. But all we're going to do is re-look at the kits for these 3 starter champs. So now on the basic skill for Guan Yu, and remember, all 3 have a increased attack in all battles by 20% leader bonus. Okay, so that just is in advance. But Guan Yu, we're calling him the Jade Cannon. Okay, not a glass cannon. He's going to be a Jade Cannon. He's going to be, I think, pretty solid. Okay, so his basic attack attacks 1 enemy, 300% times attack. If the target is under drain, then it deals additional damage equal to 5% of the target's max HP. We knew this, but we just didn't know what drain did. Okay, so drain, if you're under drain, if the enemy is under drain, attackers deal 10%, 20%, or 30%. In this case, it's drain 2, so it'll be 20% increased damage. So Guan Yu, if he lands drain, now he does not place drain on his basic. That's a big thing to note here that we'll show you. He does not place his debuff on his basic. So that is interesting. He does have an ultimate that has a 4-hitter, and we'll show you that, which balances it, but he does not place his debuff on this basic. And he does get 5% of the target's max HP if they are under drain, so that's great if he lands it. Will he land it, okay? Well, as we go forward, we're going to look at his core ability. Also, the other big thing with drain is that he's going to heal for 20% of the damage inflicted as well if they're under drain, and only if they're under drain. So that's going to be the key, is we got to land the debuffs for us to get these benefits. Okay, so after he talks about his basic, he's going to move on to his core ability, and this is an AoE attack, 400% damage, and has a 25% additional chance to strong hit. And if an enemy is defeated, it reduces the cooldown of this ability by 1 turn. So before, I was believing that this speed mechanism, reduce the cooldown of this ability by 1 turn, was the strongest of the 3 for the 3 champs. Because if you remember, Lady Zoc has if she defeats an enemy, she places a speed up 2 for 2 turns. And we'll talk about that when we get to her. But that doesn't get, I don't think is as strong. A 2-turn 20% speed boost doesn't feel as strong as reducing your cooldown from 4 to 3 on your core skill. And it's AoE, so he's hitting AoE more often, which means he's going to be defeating enemies more often, which means he's going to be able to continue to cycle this skill and build divinity faster for his ultimate. So it really makes sense and kind of works well if you now look at it that way. And then when we get to his ultimate, here's where we're going to identify a little something to kind of point out here. Okay, so we knew he has a 4-hitter on his ultimate. That's what makes him very unique. But he also, we'll wait for him to hit details. He has 120% attack times 4, which is 480%. So if you remember, Ramses has 500% attack, and Lady Zoc has 250% attack, but hits twice, so that's 500% attack. So he is 20% attack behind them if you were to like pull straws. But because he hits 4 times, and because each attack has a 35% chance to place his debuff for 2 turns, what that means is when you do the probability of having 4 hits at 35% chance each, it means you have an 82% chance to land 1 debuff out of those 4 attempts, okay? That's going to be important to note because that is the highest chance of any of the 3 champs to land that debuff on their ultimate. Okay, that's going to be interesting to see. Also, another thing to note, gain 100 divinity when defeating an enemy. We weren't sure if that meant that Guan Yu had to defeat the enemy. Simon mentioned no. If the team defeats an enemy, that gives him that divinity gain. So that helps us as well in understanding how he's going to gain his ultimate and get to 1,000 and use this and place, because he can only place his debuff on his ultimate. He doesn't have it on his core or on his basic. So he's really a straightforward sort of damage dealer on his core and his basic until he can get to his ultimate and land his debuff. Then he can get lifesteal, he can heal, he does a lot of additional damage because of his passive, because of his leader bonus, and so that's 20-40. It's almost a 60% boost to his damage with everything, and then he does that additional 5% of the target's max HP. So we had that as like, oh, he's a boss killer, and I still think he might be a boss killer, but we're gonna see something in the next 2 that will be interesting as well. So let's hold on to that for a second. Now, Lady Zoc this is her base. Same 300% times attack, 35% chance to place 1 stack of bleed on the target. On her basic, she places a single stack of bleed. And now we know what bleed does. Bleed damages an enemy 1% of their max HP damage per turn and stacks up to 10 times on subsequent application. So she can put, in a perfect world, 10 stacks of bleed and do 10% of the enemy's max HP damage on her basic, where Guan Yu can only do 5%, and that's if the target has the debuff on it, but he only puts the debuff on his ultimate. So there's a distinction there. So she puts a debuff or this debuff on each stack on her basic. So if you have a counter attack mechanism or an ally attack mechanism, and you can run her A1 over and over, or you put her in gear that lets her attack back, or hit back every time she's hit or every time there's a debuff put on, then she's gonna stack these bleeds up and do, I would say, safely 5 to 6% damage. Like, I think she's easily going to max Guan Yu's 5% of max HP. She can land 5, and then, she's not going to probably have 10 stacks at all times. They're going to fall off, and she's not going to be able to land them enough, but that's what you'll probably be trying to speed tune. So this made me really think of a clan boss killer. Or if she was like a damage dealer for a really slow, tanky, unkillable team, and you just let her stack, have sort of a counterattack or retaliate mechanism, and you just have her keep slapping with the bleed and keeping as close to 10 stacks of bleed on the target or on a clan boss at all times. So she's my first early clan boss killer. I'm going to call it out right now. I might be way off, but that's my early, now that I know bleed, sort of guess at this. So we're going to see her core next, and I definitely think, obviously, we go back in time just a hair. Let's go. Yeah. I was all over the place in my youth. Let's get back ahead to Guan Yu and then Lady Zox. Boom. Okay, so on her core ability, attacks all enemies 400% times attack, 25% additional chance strong hit, same as all the others. If an enemy is defeated, she places speed up 2 for her on herself only for 2 turns. So she's a little selfish there. Doesn't put it on the whole team, puts it on only herself. But this is what that buff is. Okay, it increases her speed stat by 20% for 2 turns. So in essence, 40% speed bump, right? Is that as strong as having an entire turn taken off of your, from a 4-turn cooldown to a 3-turn cooldown? I feel like a 3-turn cooldown is going to be way more valuable of a turn meter boost than a 40% speed bump. Let's say you have 100 speed, 40%, now you're at a 140. I mean, you're not going to go twice before they go. So I think I'm going to give Guan Yu the advantage right now in that speed mechanism. But I'm going to give Lady Zoc the advantage in her basic and that stacking of bleeds. Now let's take a look at her ultimate. And it continues with the idea of bleeding your enemy dry, which, over time, right? Slowly. So she has an AoE like all of them. She hits twice, 250, 250, so 500, same max as Ramses. Now, Guan Yu does 4 times 120, so 480, so he does just a hair less. But again, he has an 82% chance of landing his debuff, okay? Lady Zoc has a 35% and a 35% chance on the 2 times she hits, and that's to place 1 stack of bleed. That gives her a 58% chance to land 1 stack of bleed on her ultimate. So Guan Yu has an 82% chance to land 1 debuff on his ultimate from 4 hits. She has a 58% chance to land a bleed stack on her ultimate, but she also has her bleed on her basic too. And that's a big differentiator. Making up words there. All right, next we're going to move to Ramses, who was kind of our initial favorite, or initial, who we thought looked maybe the best out of the gate. And we'll look and see if that's changed at all. So if Guan Yu looks like the Jade Cannon, he might be a boss killer, but it seems like Lady Zoc might be able to actually stack bleeds and do 10% of max HP versus his 5. Maybe she's the secret boss killer, and the clan boss killer, or whatever kind of bosses are really tanky that we need to just slowly wear them down over time and bleed them. But here we are at Ramses. We see he attacks one enemy 300% of the time his attack, 35% chance to place acid on the target for 2 turns. So just like Lady Zoc, he also places his debuff on his basic, which I think is extremely important because he can be made to cycle through his basic more often and be placing an acid each time he does. Great. What does acid mean again? Okay, acid disables armor sets. It burns through the armor, if you were to think. It melts through the armor. And it deals 5% max HP damage at the start of the turn. So just like Guan Yu, if they are under acid or under drain, then 5% max HP burns off at the start of the turn, or in Guan Yu's case, when he hits. So this is even more powerful. This has a 5% max HP burn at the start of the turn automatically if they're under acid. Doesn't have to wait for anything. And it comes with another kicker. It deals double damage to shield and barrier. So if you're going up against tough content where there's high defense, high HP, and you just can't get through them, acid, he says, is going to be the answer. So that is really interesting, and in a lot of ways I think has even maybe strengthened Ramses' case, but we know a lot more about where Lady Zoc and Guan Yu might also be really powerful as well. Alright, so on to his core ability. His AoE, 400% attack, a 25% additional chance strong hit. That's the same as everybody else's in the group. If an enemy is defeated, then it increases the turn meter of this hero by 30%. Okay, so we had Lady Zoc, and Speed Up 2, which is 20% boost for 2 turns, was kind of secondary, in my opinion, to reducing the cooldown of your ability by a single turn. especially if you could reduce it by more than one turn if more than one enemy is defeated. I don't think that's how that works and how it reads, but that would be even more powerful. But I'm going to give Guan Yu the speed advantage, or speed mechanism advantage, over Lady Zoc. How about, where does Ramses come in, okay? Well, if you increase the turn meter, if an enemy is defeated, then increase the turn meter of this hero by 30%. Well, this reads similar to Guan Yu. So if an enemy is defeated, reduce the cooldown of this ability by 1 turn. I'm wondering if that means that every enemy that's defeated, 4 each wave or 5 each wave, he's reducing the cooldown of this skill by 1 turn. He's going to be able to use it every turn. So that doesn't seem right, but that's how that reads. And now as I read it for Ramses, same sort of writing. If an enemy is defeated, then increase the turn meter of this hero by 30%. First time I read this, I thought, okay, anytime an enemy is defeated, whether 1 or 4 or whatever, he gets a 30% turn meter boost. That's how I read it. But when I read it this time, I was like, wait a second, does he get a 30% turn meter boost for each enemy he's killed? Because then he'd get 30, 60, 90 for 3, 120 for 4, or 150 for 5, which means he'd be able to come right around again if he killed 3, or killed more than 3. If he killed 4 or 5 in a wave, he'd be able to cycle right back around his turn meter. That would be even more powerful, possibly, than Guan Yu, assuming, of course, that Guan Yu can't get a cooldown reduction of a turn for every enemy reduced. But again, we're just trying to flush these out and see which is stronger. But right now, I think it's between Guan Yu and Ramses in terms of who has the stronger speed mechanism with their kit. 30% turn meter bump is definitely inferior in my mind to the cooldown of the ability by 1 turn if they both read the same way. But if he gets 30, 60, 90, 120, or 150% turn meter for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 enemies defeated, then that is extremely powerful. Anyway, so that is Ramses. Now, Ramses' last, his ultimate here, again, it still makes him seem very strong. He does, let's get through to his ultimate. All right. He does tax all enemies, 500% times his attack, 75% chance to place acid on each target for 2 turns. So that it says each target, that could be interesting. If it's a spider with lots of spiderlings, does it mean every single target gets it for 2 turns? Seems like it. And 75% chance to place it versus Lady Zoc having a 35% chance to place 1 stack of bleed on a target for her ultimate. So he has a 75% chance straight up, obviously, because it's 1 hit. Lady Zoc has 2 hits at 35% chance each, which gives her a 58% chance to land a single debuff or a single stack of bleed on her ultimate. And then Guan Yu, 4 hits at 35% each, gives him still an 82% chance to land 1 debuff out of those 4 attempts. So his ultimate has the best chance of landing the debuff. Lady Zoc's has the lowest chance of landing the debuff. And Ramses is not far behind at 75% chance to land the debuff. And then he also gains 100 divinity when defeating an enemy, and he doesn't have to be the one to defeat the enemy. That is what we learned as well. He also gets a passive that boosts his damage 20% for any enemies under acid. But the big difference, I would say, is that Guan Yu doesn't have drain on his basic. I would say it's a big hole in his kit compared to the other 2. In terms of flexibility and ways you could build teams around them. Might just be my opinion, but that's just what we're seeing. And then we've got to determine if there is still 4 scrolls per ability. We saw that once before, like your basic, your core, and your ultimate had 4 scrolls of upgrading. So we have to see if that's the case. But that's going to wrap us up for today. This was a little bit of a deeper dive, but there was just a lot of juicy leaks and great info to pass along to you all. I hope you learned something that will help you in the upcoming Alpha Cavern Challenge in August and September. And hey, did this video change your mind on any of the starter champs? Are you already cooking up combinations that would be super OP? Drop in the comments below, and I'll be sure to feature you for your contribution to the community. Thanks for stopping by and sticking with us all the way to the end of this one. Take care of yourself. And remember, play smarter.